I always thought I liked living alone. There was a kind of peace in it. The way the house stayed exactly how I left it. The way silence wrapped around me like a familiar old coat. On the edge of the city, tucked between tall pines and an aging, gravel road, my little place felt more like a refuge than a home. And yet lately, the silence had started to stretch, to press, to ache. I was 36, single, and outwardly content. Friends joked that I was married to my work, and maybe there was some truth to that. But the real truth was simpler, harder to say out loud. I was tired of pretending not to want more. Tired of the casual smiles, the polite deflections. Tired of hiding the parts of myself that didn't fit neatly into everyone else's idea of who I was supposed to be. That's probably why, a few months ago, I let myself fall into something I hadn't expected. Something reckless and electric and terrifying. His name was Caleb, 24, all burning eyes and sharp smiles, like a match constantly flirting with the idea of flame. He wasn't the kind of man you brought home to meet the family. Hell, he wasn't the kind of man you brought anywhere. But somehow, in the late hours of the night, when he knocked softly on my back door, I always let him in. Tonight was supposed to be one of those nights. I was halfway through straightening up the living room, tossing old magazines into the basket, fluffing the couch pillows, checking the clock for the 100th time. When my phone buzzed, I glanced at it, expecting maybe a text from Caleb, some teasing message about what he was planning to do to me when he got here. But it wasn't him. It was my sister, Marlene. I frowned. Marlene rarely called unless something was wrong. Heart twisting a little, I answered. "Hey, Mar," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Everything okay?" Her voice, on the other end, was a little breathless, like she was already halfway through, solving some crisis. "Hey, listen, I hate to do this to you last minute, but Alex needs a place to stay for a few weeks." I blinked. "Alex? My son? Your nephew?" she said dryly. "College is on break early. Something about construction at the dorms. I'm out of town for work and you know how tight things are at Mom's place. I thought maybe he could crash with you, just until he sorts something out." I ran a hand through my hair, heart sinking. Alex was a good kid, from what I remembered. Quiet, polite, maybe a little shy. It wasn't that I didn't want to help him. It was just the timing. Caleb. Tonight. The whole situation I was neck deep in. Still, how could I say no? "Yeah, of course," I said, forcing a smile into my voice. "When's he coming?" There was a pause. He's already on his way. Should be there in about an hour." An hour. I closed my eyes, counted silently to 5. "Got it," I said. "Don't worry. I'll take care of him." Marlene let out a breath of relief. "Thank you. Seriously, you're saving my life here." We hung up, and I stood there for a minute, phone still clutched in my hand, staring at nothing. Well, there went that plan. I grabbed a hoodie off the back of the chair and yanked it over my head, trying to tamp down the nervous energy sparking under my skin. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe it was a sign I needed to slow things down with Caleb anyway. Maybe it was a blessing in disguise. But even as I told myself that, part of me, the reckless, lonely part, hoped Caleb would still come. Part of me wanted him to. Because, for once, I didn't want to be alone tonight, even if it meant risking everything. The house had settled into its nighttime rhythm by the time Caleb showed up. I heard the knock, soft, familiar, at the back door. The same way he always came. No doorbell, no front porch, no parade. Just a quiet rapping like a secret only we shared. I didn't hesitate. I crossed the kitchen in a few strides and opened the door. There he stood, hoodie slung low over his forehead, jeans riding low on his hips, eyes glinting in the porch light, like something dangerous, something beautiful. "Hey," he said, voice low and rough. His breath fogged slightly in the cool night air. "Hey yourself," I murmured. I stepped back, letting him in, and the door clicked softly behind him. The air between us thickened immediately, like it always did, electric, undeniable. Without waiting, without speaking another word, Caleb closed, the small distance between us. His hands found my waist, pulling me close, and I melted into him without resistance. The first kiss was urgent, almost desperate, teeth scraping, hands roaming. Like we were making up for every lonely night that had come before this one. I tangled my fingers in his hair, dragging him closer still, kneading him closer, until there wasn't a breath of space left between us. Caleb pressed me, back against the kitchen counter, hips grinding, his mouth hot and wild against mine. It wasn't just lust. It never had been. There was a kind of hunger to Caleb that went deeper than skin. A way he touched me like he was trying to crawl inside my chest and stay there, like he wanted to fill every empty place I pretended didn't exist. He tugged my hoodie upward, fingers skimming the bare skin underneath, and I let him. God, I let him, even as a faint voice in the back of my mind whispered that I wasn't alone tonight, that Alex could be here any minute, that this was reckless and stupid. But then, Caleb's lips found the hollow of my throat, and whatever good sense I had left evaporated. "Missed you," he muttered against my skin, voice thick, almost broken. I swallowed hard, throat tight. I missed you too. It was true. It scared me how true it was. I shoved my doubts aside and grabbed his face between my hands, dragging him back, up to kiss me properly. Deeper, slower this time. He groaned low in his chest, that sound vibrating through me, sparking down every nerve. We stumbled blindly through the kitchen, knocking over a chair, not caring. I wanted him. No, needed him, with a kind of reckless, helpless abandon that I hadn't felt in years. Somewhere between kisses and gasps, Caleb yanked his hoodie off, revealing a toned chest inked with tattoos, the kind I always traced with my fingers afterward when we lay tangled in my sheets, pretending the world outside didn't exist. I dragged my shirt off too, and his hands were on me, immediately mapping familiar territory with reverence and urgency. We crashed into the living room, half laughing, half moan. I barely registered the way the shadows shifted in the hallway beyond, too lost in him, in us. Caleb shoved me down onto the couch and crawled over me, eyes blazing. "Tell me to stop," he said, breathing hard. "If you want me to, tell me." I looked up at him, the man who had slipped past every wall I built around myself without even trying. And I couldn't say it. I wouldn't. "Don't," I whispered. He kissed me again, slow and deep and devastating. Hands fumbled with buttons, with belts, with zippers, laughter muffled between kisses, clothes peeled away in heated, clumsy haste. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It was real. It was us. I felt his body press down against mine, strong and sure, and for a moment it felt like everything else, the loneliness, the fear, the doubt, fell away. Just Caleb. Just me. Just now. We barely heard the soft creak of the front door. Barely noticed the faint sound of a bag being dropped by the stairs. It wasn't until much later, when Caleb and I lay tangled together on the couch, breathing hard, hearts pounding, in unison, that I realized we weren't alone. A faint shift in the hallway. A shadow. The unmistakable sense of being watched. I sat up sharply, pulling a blanket over myself, heart hammering. And there, standing frozen in the dim light of the entryway, was Alex, wide-eyed, mouth slightly open, backpack forgotten at his feet. For a moment, none of us moved. The world seemed to teeter, breathless, on the edge of something that couldn't be taken back. For a beat, none of us spoke. The only sound was the soft crackling from the fireplace and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Alex stood there, frozen, pale, backpack slipping from one shoulder, like he had stumbled into some nightmare he couldn't wake from, and maybe, in a way, he had. Caleb reacted first. He scrambled off the couch, grabbing for his clothes, muttering a curse under his breath. I sat there, still half covered by the blanket, feeling like I was rooted to the spot. My mind screamed at me to move, to say something, to do something. But my body refused. Alex's wide, stunned eyes flicked from Caleb to me, then back again. I watched the realization bloom across his face, shock curdling into something like betrayal, confusion, maybe even disgust. Caleb yanked his jeans on in record time, stumbling as he shoved his feet into his shoes. He didn't look at me as he mumbled, "I should go," and headed straight for the door. It clicked shut behind him with a soft, definitive finality. And then it was just me and Alex. The silence between us was unbearable, thick and sharp, like walking barefoot across broken glass. I opened my mouth, desperate to explain. But explain what exactly? That I was a lonely man who'd found comfort in the arms of someone forbidden? That I wasn't ashamed? That part of me, some defiant, reckless part, wasn't sorry at all? But before I could find any words, Alex turned on his heel and bolted up the stairs, his footsteps pounding like gunshots in the hollow house. A door slammed shut, and then there was nothing. I exhaled shakily, scrubbing a hand over my face, my skin still burning with heat, with leftover passion, with shame, with something that almost tasted like pride. Because the thing was, I didn't feel broken by it. I didn't feel the crushing guilt I thought I should. I felt exposed. Yes. Vulnerable. Raw. But somewhere under the wreckage of this night, a part of me stirred. A part that had grown tired of hiding, tired of folding myself into smaller shapes just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. Still, I couldn't pretend this wasn't a disaster. I pulled on my clothes mechanically, moving like a man underwater. Each second dragged, heavy and suffocating. The house felt too big now, every creak and groan of the old floorboards amplified in the suffocating quiet. I moved to the kitchen on autopilot, splashing cold water on my face, gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles went white. What was I supposed to do? March upstairs and demand a conversation? Give Alex some after-school special lecture about love and loneliness and the complicated ways people try to survive? No. He needed space. Hell, I needed space. I padded back to the living room, gathering up the scattered remnants of the night. Caleb's forgotten hoodie, a pillow knocked off the couch, my own pride shattered across the floor. I sank onto the couch, pulling the blanket tighter around me like it might shield me from the consequences, still rolling toward me like a freight train. Sleep was impossible. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of Alex moving around upstairs, opening drawers, pacing, muffled bursts of frustrated breath. Every sound stabbed into me. Was he angry? Disgusted? Scared? The thought twisted something deep inside me, a cocktail of regret and stubbornness that left me raw. I couldn't undo what he saw. I couldn't unlive the truth of who I was. And somewhere in the tangle of regret and fear, I realized something even scarier. I didn't want to. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sorry for being seen. Not really. Whatever happened next, whatever fallout waited for me in the morning, I would face it. I had to. Because if nothing else, tonight had stripped away the last of my pretending, and even if it cost me, even if it broke things I cared about, I wasn't going back to hiding. Not ever again. The clock on my nightstand blinked 2:17 a.m. in cold red numbers. I hadn't slept. I didn't even bother trying. I lay on my back, staring at the cracked line on the ceiling, every muscle locked tight, heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the old window panes with a soft, lonely sigh. Inside, the house was silent, or so I thought. A soft knock broke through the stillness. I sat up, heart jerking. Another knock. Hesitant. Barely there. "Come in," I said, my voice rough from disuse. The door creaked open, and there he was. Alex, standing in the hallway's dim light, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie, head ducked slightly like he wasn't sure if he should be here. His hair was mussed, his jaw tight, but his eyes were steady, too steady. For a boy who had seen what he had seen tonight. "You okay?" I asked quietly, not knowing what else to say. He hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. For a long moment, he just stood there, the space between us buzzing with a tension I didn't know how to name. Finally, he spoke, I'm not mad, I blinked. You're not? He shook his head, eyes dropping to the floor. I was surprised. Shocked, I guess. But not mad. I didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know where to file it in the mental cabinet. Of all the reactions I had prepared for, Alex shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. I guess I just didn't expect it. You. With another guy. I let out a breath, sinking back against the headboard. Yeah, I said, a wry twist to my mouth. I don't exactly advertise it. Silence again. Not cold, but heavy. Careful. Alex moved, closer, perching on the edge of the armchair across from my bed. He looked small in the oversized hoodie, but there was something sharp in his eyes. Something old and bruised and familiar. I get it, he said quietly. More than you think. I frowned. Get what? He hesitated, and for a second I thought he wouldn't say it. But then he lifted his gaze and met mine dead on. The hiding, he said. The pretending. The wanting someone you're not supposed to. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because they hurt, but because they felt like a mirror shoved in my face. You don't have to explain yourself to me, Alex added quickly, his voice cracking at the edges. I mean, you're allowed to be happy with whoever you want. I stared at him, trying to find my footing in this sudden new terrain. You're okay with it? I asked, voice rough. He smiled, small and sad. Yeah. Honestly, I wish I was as brave. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, studying him. Alex, I said carefully, is there something you want to tell me? He looked away, jaw working, a flush crept up his neck. You don't have to, I added, softer. Only if you want to. Another beat of silence, and then, so softly I almost missed it, he said, I've never told anyone before. Not Mom. Not my friends. Nobody. He squeezed his hands together in his lap, knuckles whitening. I like guys, he said in a rush. Or, I think I do. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and trembling. Something inside me cracked open, something fierce and protective and achingly tender. I crossed the space between us slowly, kneeling in front of his chair so we were eye level. Hey, I said, my voice steady even though my heart wasn't. There's nothing wrong with you. Nothing to figure out. You are exactly who you're supposed to be. He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the tears gathering in his eyes. I was so scared you'd hate me, he whispered. I shook my head, throat tight. Never. Not ever. Without thinking, I reached out and rested a hand lightly on his knee, a simple, steadying touch. But the moment our skin connected, something shifted. The air thickened, crackling with a new, dangerous tension. Alex's eyes darkened slightly, his breathing shallow. I should have pulled back. Should have created space. But I didn't. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The room tilted, reality bending around the weight of all the things we weren't supposed to feel. His hand slid tentatively over mine, fingers curling lightly. I swallowed hard, pulse hammering. This was wrong. This was dangerous. But God help me. It was also something else, something I couldn't name without shattering it. We stayed like that hand to hand, breath to breath until the world outside the walls of my bedroom disappeared, and deep down I knew. Whatever line we were standing on, we were already too close to turn back. The days that followed blurred into a strange, delicate dance. Alex stayed in the house like a ghost, quiet, careful, but never quite distant. He moved through the spaces I had once occupied alone, filling them with a strange new weight, a presence I couldn't ignore. At first, we kept a safe distance. We spoke politely, casually, about school, about the weather, about things that didn't matter. But underneath it all, there was something humming. A low, constant vibration, like the strings of a guitar pulled too tight. Little things set it off. The way his hand would brush against mine when we both reached for the coffee pot. The way our eyes would lock across the kitchen table, both of us looking away too quickly, our cheeks flushing with silent admission. The way he would sit too close on the couch when we watched mindless late-night TV. His thigh pressing against mine, the heat of him bleeding through denim and skin. Every accidental touch felt deliberate. Every glance lingered just a little too long. Every breath between us grew heavier, harder to ignore. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining it, that I was projecting my own loneliness onto someone too young, too confused, too off-limits. But deep down, I knew better. I knew because I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Eyes dark, mouth slightly parted, expression raw and unguarded. I knew because I could feel the way he leaned into me without realizing it, the way he stayed just a moment too long when we touched. And worst of all, I knew because a part of me wanted it, ached for it, ached for him. It terrified me. It thrilled me. It broke me wide open. One night, 3 days after that moment in my bedroom, everything cracked. It started innocently enough. We were sitting on the back porch, a bottle of wine between us, the summer night heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and rain. The sky overhead was smeared with stars, and the cicadas sang in the dark. Alex had laughed at something I said. A real laugh, the kind that made his eyes crinkle at the corners, and I found myself laughing too, the sound alien and reckless in my own mouth. We drank too much, talked too much, let the guardrails between us slip and slide away like mist. He told me things I didn't know, about feeling like an outsider, about carrying a secret he didn't have words for, about watching his friends date girls and wondering why he couldn't feel the same. I told him things I'd never told anyone, about the years I spent pretending, about the nights I stared at my ceiling wondering if there was something broken inside me, about the way it felt to finally stop lying to myself. The confessions left us raw, bleeding, open. At some point, Alex shifted closer. At some point, my hand brushed his. At some point, our breathing synced, slow and shallow. And then, God help me, he leaned in. It was tentative, uncertain, a silent question hanging between us. I could have pulled away. I could have said no, but I didn't. I leaned in too. The kiss was feather-light at first, just a brush of lips, trembling and fragile. A breathless, terrified promise. He pulled back almost immediately, eyes wide, searching my face for regret, for disgust, for anger. But all he found was me, just me, standing on the same trembling edge he was. I cupped the side of his face, my thumb grazing the sharp line of his jaw. His skin was warm, impossibly soft. "It's okay," I whispered, barely trusting my voice. Alex made a sound, a broken, desperate thing, and closed the distance again. This time, the kiss was deeper, fuller, fueled by months of loneliness and years of secret longing. It wasn't perfect. It was clumsy and breathless and far too rushed. But it was real. It was ours. His hands fisted in the fabric of my t-shirt, clinging like he was afraid I might disappear. Mine slid up into his hair, holding him there, anchoring us both. When we finally broke apart, gasping, we sat there in stunned silence, forehead to forehead, hearts pounding. Neither of us spoke. There were no words big enough for what we had just done. No words big enough for what we had just become. All I knew was that the line we weren't supposed to cross, the line that had loomed so large and terrifying between us, was gone now, erased, and neither of us wanted to go back. Morning came too soon. The sunlight spilled through the kitchen window in soft, golden streaks, catching dust motes in the air like tiny floating stars. The house was still, almost sacred in its silence. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, staring out the window but seeing nothing. I didn't hear Alex come in until he was standing right across from me. He looked wrecked, hair rumpled, dark circles under his eyes, lips pressed into a thin, uncertain line. But he was here. He had come to me. "Hey," he said, voice rough. "Hey," I said back, barely above a whisper. We stood there for a beat, the enormity of what had happened pressing down on both of us, thick and heavy and real. I pushed out the chair across from me. He sat. Neither of us touched the coffee. Neither of us touched anything. For a while, we just existed there, breathing the same air, holding onto the same fragile, trembling thread that had pulled us across the line last night and left us stranded together on the other side. "I'm scared," Alex finally said, voice raw. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Me too." He looked at me then, and there was something so achingly vulnerable in his gaze that I wanted to reach across the table and pull him into my arms. "I don't know what this means," he said. "I don't know what happens now." I exhaled slowly, fingers curling tighter around the mug. "I don't either," I admitted. "But I know what I felt. Last night wasn't a mistake. It wasn't wrong." He blinked, and I saw tears gather in the corners of his eyes. "You're not wrong," I said fiercely, voice gaining strength. "You're not broken, and neither am I." For a second, I thought he might break apart right there, shatter into 1,000 pieces across the kitchen floor. Instead, he pushed back his chair and stood, walking slowly around the table until he was standing right beside me. I tilted my head up to look at him. His hand found mine, small, hesitant, and when our fingers laced together, it felt like a promise. "We can't tell anyone," he said quietly, his thumb brushing the back of my knuckles. "I know. They wouldn't understand." "No," I agreed. "They wouldn't. The world beyond this house, the world of expectations and judgments and unforgiving lines, would tear us apart if it ever found out. We both knew that. But here, in this moment, in the quiet shelter of early morning light, none of that mattered. All that mattered was him and me, and this strange, beautiful, terrifying thing that had sparked between us, fragile and fierce, like fire cupped between trembling hands. "I don't want to lose this," Alex whispered. "You won't," I said, squeezing his hand. "I want to choose this," he said. "I want to choose you." Something cracked inside me. A deep, aching sound I felt more than heard. I stood, reaching up to cradle his face in my hands. He leaned into my touch like it was the only thing holding him up. "I choose you too," I said, voice steady now. "I don't know how, and I don't know what it'll look like, but I choose you." His breath hitched, a soft, broken sound, and then he kissed me, soft and slow and sure. No desperation, no fear, just acceptance, just us. When we finally pulled apart, the world outside was still waiting, cold and brutal and filled with all the ways we could be torn down. But inside these walls, we had carved out something real, something worth fighting for. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was ours. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, that was enough.